Hello and welcome back everyone to our podcast of two halves. Today's episode will be split into two halves. We'll be focusing on the Championship first and then moving on to the Premier League later on. Like last week, it will be hosted by myself, Tom, and today I'm joined by Mo and Sam. Say hello, boys.
All right, lads.
Hi, how are you doing?
We'll start off with the Championship then, lads. And this week there are lots of different talking points. And I thought we could start off today with the first talking point was obviously the big news over the weekend that Karanka is going to be sacked by Birmingham. Obviously, they've been on a dismal run, 13 points from the last 57 available. So my question to you, Sam, I thought is, do you think it was the right decision to get rid of him and then replace him with Bowyer from Charlton? Was that the right call, or what's your opinion on that?
I'm never one to call for a manager to get sacked. I do understand it's the toughest job at football. But if you look at some of the statistics behind Birmingham, you can see exactly why it's happened. They've got the worst home record in the Championship by quite a large margin. They've only got 3 wins from 18 at home, averaging only 0.67 points per game at home. And when you're a team fighting at the bottom, your home form really has to be a big factor in why you can stay up in the division. They're averaging only 0.72 goals a game. They failed to score in 16 home league games. And coming up, they play 4 of the top 6. So hopefully Bowyer will kickstart that managerial honeymoon period that will allow him to pick up some results.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly needed. Obviously, all the stats you've just gone through there, it just goes to show what a bad situation the club are in at the moment. Obviously, facing a big battle to stay up and improve the form. So either Sam or Mo, do you think that Bowyer can change that form? Can he bring a change of fortunes to the side?
I think one of the big factors that will help Lee Bowyer is when he went in at Charlton, that was a club in similar situation to Birmingham, an absolute turmoil with the owners. A lot of the fans were at the time wanting the owners out, and he had to work with a limited budget. And I think what Lee Bowyer did at Charlton is he got the best out of the players that were there originally. Before, obviously, when the owners changed, he was allowed to bring in who he wanted. But I feel like he's going to need to carry them skills on with Birmingham in order to hopefully make them survive in the Championship.
Yeah, that's good. So Mo, in terms of if Bowyer comes in and, let's say worst case scenario, if they do go down, do you think he's the right man in charge to then take them back up next season? How do you think that could play out? Obviously, it's all ifs and maybes, but do you think he's the right man with both eventualities if they do stay up or go down?
That's a difficult one, just because when they get relegated, or if they get relegated, shall I say, it depends which players stay, how they recruit, and how they react to getting relegated if they do get relegated. For me, looking at Birmingham's side, it's not the best of sides on paper, but you don't think it's a side that should be getting relegated for me. For me, I don't think they've got over the sacking of Gary Rowett a couple of years ago when they was on the brink of the playoffs. In terms of coming back up, Boyers must be promised something somewhere of getting back in the summer. Otherwise, he might have not took the job. So I do think Birmingham are a massive club and they'll attract players, especially even though they'll be playing in League One. So I think they'll be up there next season.
Yeah, that's great. So yeah, Mo, I've obviously asked a question to Sam, but do you think it was the right call from Birmingham to get rid of Karanka now, or do you think it's a bit little too late in the sense that they brought in a new manager, or about to bring in a new manager, should I say? Do you think it's the right call? Do you think they've left it too late, or do you think that it needed to be done now?
Yeah, I do feel the sacking of Karanka was coming. They were losing football matches, but it was the manner they were losing football matches. So they lost to Bristol City, for example, 3-0. They lost to Millwall 2-0. The manner of defeats that they were losing, they weren't showing fight, and it looked like he lost the changing room a little bit. And the one that I thought really affected them that season, it was. I've watched Birmingham a lot of times this season, and it just seems like they lack that bit of spark and that bit of something to kick them on. And I feel like they needed something to happen, otherwise they were destined for relegation. Will the new manager change it? We'll see. he needs to get the round running. There's not that many football matches left, and the confidence in the side isn't there. So if they do pick up a couple of wins from the first few games, then it's definitely the right decision.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess it's one of those things where, you just have to keep an eye on the situation, and time will tell whether it was the right appointment and the right decision to make. But I think you do have that sometimes when a manager does come in, you get that feel good factor and the results do get lifted, at least in the short term. So we'll just have to keep an eye on that. Moving on to the next topic then that I thought we could discuss today is Barnsley Form. So on the contrast, the team that are in great form, sixth place in the championship. So moving back across to you, Sam, what have you made to Barnsley's form? Do you think it's something that they can really sort of take in to the rest of the running? Do you think they can push for the playoff spaces? Do you think they've got enough in the team to do that?
I think Barnsley is the type of story that every single football fan likes to see in a season. This time last season they were hovering just in or just over the relegation zone, looking like they were, destined for another season really of yo-yo in between League One and the Championship. But how they've recruited players this season has been fantastic, and I think I can definitely see Barnsley staying in and around the playoffs and potentially doing some teams some damage. Like the Swanseas, the Brentfords, they potentially might not go up automatically. If you're looking through the team, they've got the joint top goal scoring centre back and that big lad Heelick at the back. They've got 13 goals from set pieces this season, which is second behind Cardiff. And they're the type of stats you want to have when you are chasing the playoffs. Not every game you're going to play free-flowing football that's going to take teams apart. Sometimes you do need to just keep it solid at the back. And with a player like Carlton Morris, who scored 5 goals and 9, the big lad Heelick, and their ability to score from set pieces, I definitely think they'll give themselves every chance of winning them tight games that you're needed to fire a team into the top 6.
Yeah, so thanks for that insight. Just going off something you mentioned there, so obviously last season he was very close at times to being relegated, and obviously they've avoided that. But having such a good season, and as you mentioned, recruitment and things like that, do you think should they finish the season in the playoff spots? Do you think they have enough going forward if they were to get promoted? Do you think it would be a bad thing for the club? Sometimes you've seen it with teams, they've been promoted but they're not ready. Do you think Barnsley would be prepared to go to the Premier League? There's obviously a massive gulf with a lot of teams that do get promoted. So do you think it would come too soon after battling relegation last season? What do you think?
Look, if Barnsley, presuming if they were to go up, I'm not going to sort of cover it up. It is going to be a huge challenge for them. And with the continued TV money coming into the Premier League, that gulf between the Championship and the Premier League seems to be getting bigger week on. But however, Barnsley, even for the Championship, they are one of the smallest budgets. You look at the type of players they've brought in. Previously, I mentioned Carlton Morris. 6 goals in 18 for MK Dons this season before they snapped him up. And it seemed like a weird sign at the time, but they must have addressed that it'll fit their system and go on to score 5 goals in 9 games for Barnsley. I think what would be massive for Barnsley is they've got to recruit well like they have done, but they've got to stick to their system. You see a lot of teams, like Norwich, for example, they'll go up and stick to their system, and sometimes it backfires. So they've just got to hope. They've got to stick to their system, like you say, and just hope to God that they bring in the right players to hopefully keep them on the right side of the relegation.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a huge challenge, and obviously it's a lot of ifs and maybes again, because there's no guarantee that they will get those playoffs, but the current form suggested they will. Mo, just a question for yourself then. Do you think that if they do get the playoff spots this season and, do reach that sort of goal that I'm sure they would have dreamt of at the start of the season, do you think they've got enough in their squad to compete against the likes of maybe Reading, Brentford, Swansea and Watford? Do you think they've got enough in that squad to be able to beat these sides and potentially do be promoted to the Premier League this season?
Well, if you're a Barnsley fan, you'll say, why not? We've already beat Brentford 2-0. How I look at it is the playoffs, 3 games, 3 football matches, form goes out the window, the best side on the day goes through most of the time. But Huddersfield, for example, a couple of seasons ago, they were playing against an influenced Sheffield Wednesday side. And then they beat a good Reading side at Wembley without scoring a goal in normal time. They won the playoffs. So when you get to the playoffs, it's anyone's game, and we haven't lost
one defeat in the last 12, I think, for Barnsley.
Yeah, 1 in the last 12. So when that defeat comes, I think that defeat was against Chelsea as well. So when that defeat comes, they're not going to go and beat all season. It's the way they react to it. And if they react well to it, then I think, yeah, why not? Why can't they get playoffs? But it's just the confidence just goes when that defeat comes, and it's just how you react to it, really. So it'll be interesting, but as you say, why not? Why can't they get playoffs, and why can't they win the playoffs if they get the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, what you touched on there is really interesting. It's a test of a team's character, isn't it? When things aren't going well, obviously all they've known for the last month or two is, constantly going unbeaten, winning games. I think was it 7 games in a row that they went on before drawing against Derby the other week. So I think obviously it's a test of the character if they do lose, whether they can then turn it around again and have a good run of form. So again, like you said, there are a few games to go, so it'll be one of those things that it's going to be a big challenge for the club. But what an achievement it will be if they do get into the playoffs, and from there they can then dream of what could happen. But so that's obviously Barnsley covered. Another talking point was the weekend's game between Norwich and Sheffield Wednesday. So a battle of a team that's top of the league and seemingly running away with it, and Sheffield Wednesday, a team that's in the relegation zone. It's not been a good season for them on and off the pitch. So starting with Norwich, Sam, do you think that obviously they're looking guaranteed to be champions this season, but just how good and impressive have they been to be at the top of the championship this season?
I think Norwich have been nothing short of sensational, to be honest. I think a big factor for Norwich over the summer was how many of these key young players could they keep hold of in the summer. Obviously, the lad Lowe went to Newcastle, but they managed to keep hold of Timo Pukki, Todd Cantwell, Ben Godfrey went as well, but they managed to keep hold of the lad Max Aarons. And I feel like the form they showed 2 years ago when they first rose to the summit of the championship, they definitely kept going. Timo Pukki's been absolutely fantastic again this season. He actually, at the moment, he's got 10 goals in 8 games, and he's become the fastest player to ever hit 50 championship goals, and he did it in 75 games. They're the third best points total ever at this stage of the season, and again scored 2 fantastic goals against Sheffield Wednesday. And I really think that they're going to run away with the championship and potentially win it, being about 15, 20 points, which would be a huge margin.
So on the other hand, Mo, obviously the form of Norwich has been mightily impressive this season, but Sheffield Wednesday are a team that obviously had issues going into the season with a points reduction from last season. Do you think that I think the 7 points adrift, 7 points in a row, well, 7 defeats in a row that they've encountered. Do you think they can turn it around, or has their fate already been sealed? Do you think they can stay up, or do you think they're going down into League One?
I think you've got to say they've got a chance, but for me, I've got them to be relegated. You're just looking at, again, talking about the manner of defeats. They're losing games comfortably. Like, they've lost to Reading 3-0. They've lost to Brentford 3-0. They've lost to Millwall 4-1. And Darren Moore's not even picked up a point yet. I know some of these games he wasn't in charge. And what I'd love to know is what's made Darren Moore take this job. He was one of the high flyers in League One with Doncaster, and he's took a job for a club who are destined for relegation. So it'll be interesting to see what's behind and what he's been told for him to take that job. It's hard to say they won't get relegated at this stage, just struggling to pick up points. And you watch them at the weekend against Norwich, and they're playing decent football. They probably did deserve to get something out of the match, but that's where you need to vitalise. And when you're 7 points adrift, the teams above, they're starting to pick up points. So I'd say they are destined for relegation.
Yeah, you've mentioned it there. Obviously, you'd love to know the reasons behind why he's took this job on. But I feel like any Sheffield Wednesday fan would vouch for it as well. The amount of confusion that comes out of that club, with the ownership and everything like that, it's like, to me, from what I've seen throughout this season, is that just nobody seems to know exactly what's going on. And obviously, if they were to be relegated, I think it wouldn't come as much of a surprise to, the fans and the fans of the Championship as well. With the form that they've encountered this season. So the last talking point then for you both, Preston North End. Obviously, as you both are Preston North End fans, I'm sure you've got a lot to say about this. But last weekend, a defeat to Wycombe, who were obviously bottom place of the Championship. So, what are your thoughts then, Sam, on that loss, which is another poor result for a side that have just won 3 games so far this year? what needs to change? What's your opinions on that so far?
It is a really tricky one with Preston, and I think the problem is with Preston, a lot of outsiders looking in think, oh, you've lost Ben Davies to Liverpool in the transfer window, you've lost Ben Pearson to Bournemouth, you've lost Darnell Fisher to Middlesbrough, and then you have one of your key centre backs, Patrick Bauer, and your goalkeeper ruled out injured for the season. I think a lot of people think, oh, bad performance stemmed from that, but I really don't think it has. I think we go back a year to now when the football regime after the lockdown, our performances have severely dipped since then. We picked up some really poor results in that run, dropping points to Luton, dropping silly points at home to Nottingham Forest in games we should have won. And ever since then, our performances really haven't been at the standards, that Alex Neil set for himself when he walked in. And albeit they were very, very high standards and gave us all that belief that we could push on to the Premier League. But we've seen we're going backwards, and maybe a change in management is perhaps what's needed, or, a big summer this year we're bringing in some quite high caliber experienced players to help this slide, because the last thing we want to do is be looking over our shoulders this season. I think we will be fine, but going into next season when a lot of these loan players expire, if we can't bring in them same players on loan again or similar caliber of permanent players, I could see us seriously struggling next season. It's all about rebuilding for Preston at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting viewpoint. That obviously you just touched on it there. Obviously your form going into the resumption of the league after the lockdown last year. Obviously you're pushing for the playoffs and it derailed from there. Do you think that a lot of the struggles you've encountered on the pitch is down to the lack of fans? I know every team is struggling from the lack of fans, but some teams more than others. Do you think the lack of that support in the grounds has affected the team and the manager? Do you think that's derailed your good form that you was experiencing last season? And obviously since then it's gone down the drain a bit. What do you think to that?
It's a really difficult one. Going into the break before the COVID-19 halted the season last year, we had lost 4 out of 5 games, albeit we had played some of the big hitters in terms of Fulham and West Brom, who obviously went on to get promotion at the time. The tricky one is our home form at the start of the season, where your home advantage of your fans really should count, was really shocking. We lost our first 5 games without scoring, I think. And then obviously it's sort of derailed a bit on the road as well now, but it could be a huge factor. But then again, it's the same for every team, and we shouldn't be making excuses like that, in my opinion.
Yeah, like I said, it is something that every team suffers the same problem, no fans. But so moving on to Mo, do you think that a change in management is needed? Obviously, Sam touched on it, but do you think that they would need to change it up by bringing a new manager in? I've seen a lot of talk on it on social media in the last week, whether it's the time now to, say the goodbyes and part ways and bring someone else in. Do you think that's what needs to change to improve the form on the pitch?
It's a tricky one. It feels everything's very repetitive at the moment and everything's very flat. I watched us at the weekend against Wickham, who are bottom of the league, again destined for relegation, and we seem miles off it. And I know we've got a lot of new players, we've got some loan signings. A couple of our best players have left in Ben Pearson, Ben Davies, Darnell Fisher. But still, we're playing against a side that are bottom of the table. It's not like we're playing your Norwiches and your Brentfords. We're playing sides who aren't very good football teams. No disrespect to Wickham, I feel like they played brilliant and took advantage of us being off the gas. But I do feel like we might need a change, and just to freshen it up a little bit. We've had Neil for a couple of seasons now. I do think he is a good manager, but it just feels like everything's getting very repetitive. The only issue is that for me at the moment is who is there out there that'll improve us. And another thing, I don't know if Neil would still be in a job at PNE if fans were in. It's a different story. Right now, you're tuning in at 3 o'clock on a Saturday and you tune out at 5 o'clock. So I do feel a lot of the fan base aren't as interested. It's a different story if fans are in, but I can't see us sacking him, to be honest with you, because the financial payments and the figures that'll be in the contracts that he signed, it's not something that Preston North End can pay out, in my opinion.
Yeah, so just to round off this sort of championship-based podcast then, and a question for both of you. I'll start with you, Mo, just because you've mentioned it there. Obviously, you think it's unlikely that, a sacking would be on the cards and, the financials of it all. But if you could bring in another manager to PNE, who would you choose? Is there anyone in mind that you think would be a go-to?
Well, there's a manager and then there's a realistic manager. You look who's out there right now, and for me, the best out there for us is Chris Wilder and Eddie Howe, but do I think any of them will come to us? Definitely not. I know some supporters have been asking for them, but I just can't see us bringing in. Why would Chris Wilder take our job? Realistically, managers that appeal to us would be like Michael Appleton, Gareth Ainsworth at Wickham, Paul Gallagher. To be honest, none of these managers really appealed to me, and I don't feel like they can do a better job than Alex Neil. The best out of the bunch will be Michael Appleton. Yeah.
And Sam, obviously, most has covered quite a few different names there as potential, managers that could come in. Is there anyone on your mind that you'd like to see? Obviously, like you said, you don't like to see any manager be sacked, but if in the event someone was sacked, who would you choose to replace him at the moment?
Well, I'm similar to Mo in that regard. I mean, Chris Wilder and Eddie Howe would be the dream, having managed in the Premier League, got a promotion on the CV, but like I say, it's unlikely whether they'd work under the restrictions of Deepdale. It looks like we're heading down the head coach role, so they wouldn't be in charge of the transfers and incomings at the club, which I think could be a deal breaker for a lot of sort of top managers like that. Michael Appleton, I'd like him. He plays good attacking football at Lincoln on a budget, which we have. However, having just signed an extended contract there, it's a big depend. It really depends on whether we can afford to pay out the compensation fee. There's likely to be a fair few million quid. So looking back in, what I'd like now is Neil to maybe be removed now. Give it Paul Gallagher till the end of the season. See what he's like with it. Get the players used to not working under Alex Neil and potentially see what becomes available in the summer.
Yeah, well, thank you for both of you for your time there and just talking all things Championship. I think we covered quite a lot and a few different interesting viewpoints there. So I hope you enjoyed listening at home, and thank you both for joining me. So then, obviously, moving on now to the Premier League section, and there's been a few different topics that have come about in last week, and obviously the most glaring one to mention is Chris Wilder's sacking from Sheffield United. Obviously, a manager that's hugely admired in Sheffield, and I think a lot of fans in the footballing community admire what he's done for the club. But what are your initial thoughts, Mo, on that sacking? Do you think it's the right call? Do you think there's been something going on behind the scenes that's led to that decision? What's your initial thoughts on that big decision to sack him from Sheffield United?
In one word, mind-blowing. I don't see any logic behind that sacking. I spoke to many Sheffield United fans. I spoke to many of my mates who are football fans, and I can't find one person that's behind that decision. It's just bizarre why they sack him at this stage of the season when they're destined for relegation. First of all, you're looking at on the football side of it. You might understand it if it's made in November or December and you're looking like, Sheffield United, they've sacked him to maybe try and stay up, but right now he's just thinking they're going to get relegated. There's only one man that the players love playing for, and he's probably the best man to bring him back up. The manager's been there for what, 5 years? He picked them up when they were in League One. They had 5 seasons. They had 5 seasons in League One. And Chris Wilder's taken them up. And he's took them up again. So it's just like he knows them players better than anyone. And he's recruited in a way of his style of play. So it's just like bringing someone else in. You can bring a top manager in. Sheffield United don't have good players on paper. They just have a good team that can play together Chris Wilder's way. So it's absolutely bizarre, and I feel like it's an awful decision.
Yeah, so obviously I think I'm in agreement with you. It's one of those decisions that maybe you could understand it a bit more if it was in November or December, but Obviously, going to you, Sam, with your thoughts about it. Obviously, we know on the pitch that they've struggled. They've lost 23 out of the 29 games so far this season. But do you think that they should have stuck with him? As Mo mentioned, it's a team that on paper might not necessarily be the best in terms of players you've got at their disposal. But do you think he would have been the right man, Chris Wilder, to, if they did drop down, which is, it's looking incredibly likely, do you think he would have been the right manager to then take them back up again, reset in the Championship, make a few changes, and then take them back up? Do you think, what do you think? Do you think they should have kept faith in him? Or how do you feel about it?
Oh, 100%. I mean, when I read the news that he was being sacked, especially at this time, I was absolutely mind blown, like Mo said. I couldn't believe it. Obviously, to revolutionise the way they've played to the extent he has with the overlapping centre-backs and really built a core of the team from your League One days, like your Chris Basham, players like that, and to carry them up to the Premier League, playing his own style of football, his own real way of doing things, and to sort of bin him off with about 10 games of the season left before he can have a real crack at the Championship. I think it's absolutely shocking. I feel really bad for the man, and I understand from what I've read that there was a few issues between him and the board. I remember when they got promoted, there was a bit of a argument about budgets, and apparently there's been a bit of a dilemma over who's bringing the players in. I know apparently the board isn't very happy with the lads he's brought in, and some of his signings haven't been the best. You look at Ryan Brewster, hasn't been the greatest. Aaron Ramsdale had some poor spells, and the likes of Callum Robinson and Ollie Burke haven't really hit the place up. But you look at that squad, it's his players. They've all come in, adapted to his system, and it's similar to Norwich really under Daniel Farke last season. They stuck by him, and they're smashing the Championship this year. If Sheffield United went down, kept a load of their good players, which they likely would, I could have seen them winning the division by 10, 15 points, similar to what Norwich have. So I am very surprised by the sacking, I must admit.
Do you think then, obviously, like I've mentioned myself, that if they are to go down into the Championship, do you think that they will face an uphill battle with the squad that they've got under a different manager? Do you think it will be a massive challenge for them to try and rebound back into the Premier League next year? Because I think, speaking on the behalf of any Sheffield United fan listening, I don't think any fan would want, with the group of players, they don't want to be out of the Premier League for a long time again. Do you think that they will face an uphill battle next season without Chris Wilder and that squad together? What do you think on that?
Well, it's never as simple as it is. A lot of people think you can go down in the division, you keep the large majority of players, you bounce straight back. It's really not that simple. You look at teams like Wolverhampton Wanderers when they were relegated in 2011, went straight down to League One. Huddersfield Town, they got relegated, similar second season. They're messing around towards the bottom end of the Championship, having tried a couple of managers since. It's no guarantee. And I feel like under Chris Wilder, he's the type of manager to really motivate players, have that man management aspect to him that would really help a team climb up the Championship. It really depends what route they go down with. I know they've got Paul Heckingbottom until the end of the season now, and he's worked with the under-23s, he probably knows the identity of the club. I'm not expecting too much to change too quickly. However, I feel like Sheffield United could go either way. They bring in a manager who can really get on side with the players and give them that man management and that motivation to push on. That squad, presuming they keep it together, would be a top-end Championship squad on paper. However, once you have that losing mentality, it is very difficult to shift, and that's why you see so many teams come down and really struggle. Yeah.
So Mo, what do you think? Do you agree that obviously it's not as easy as saying they can rebound back up, but do you think they can? Do you think if they do get relegated and then have to try and bounce back, do you think they will be able to do that next season, or do you think that they'll face a couple of seasons of struggle, whether that's going on a downwards trajectory or an upwards one? What do you think on that?
I think the parachute payments certainly help clubs that go down. You look at the team, they've got very good Championship players, I'd say. Like, for example, players who I think they're horrendous in the Premier League, such as Ali McBurney, Ryan Brewster's not being great. Aaron Ramsdale, he'd be a very good Championship goalkeeper. I think going into the Championship, it's not easy, and you've got to bounce back early for me. You look at teams like Stoke, Huddersfield didn't take it very well either. And you can quickly become a mid-table relegation Championship side. So it's important that they recruit well in the summer. They get rid of the players potentially on high wages, because end of the day, it can start affecting you as the seasons go by, having players on very high wages. Look at Sheffield Wednesday, for example. Financial fair play and coming into play. But yeah, if they deal with it like Norwich have done and Watford have done, keeping hold of it, I'd say they're big players. They should be in the top 6 next May, but it won't be easy by any extent. New manager coming in, different style of play. The Sheffield United players, they didn't look like they wanted to even play for the manager on the weekend against Leicester. Billy Sharp's interview after the game said it all, really. You could tell the players were gutted. So the next manager coming in, it won't be the easiest getting the fans on board, but I'm sure it's not anything that a couple of wins couldn't sort out.
Yeah, so moving away from Sheffield United now then, and moving on to another team that have faced a lot of struggles this season, and not just this season. They're not the most attractive football player. Well, they are attractive when it comes to playing football, but they just don't seem to be able to string wins together, and that's Brighton. So, Mo, what do you think about Brighton's misfortune this season? Do you think that they'll be just avoid the drop? Obviously, 16th at the moment, and they've got Newcastle and Fulham around them. Do you think they have enough to survive in the league, or do you think that they are really sort of seriously threatened to go down? How do you feel about Brighton this season?
Do they have enough? Absolutely. Will there be a relegation fight? Probably. The reason for this is I feel sorry on Graham Potter. Genuinely, he sets them up perfectly majority of weeks. They dominate. Like literally every time I watch them. For example, the Crystal Palace game a couple of weeks ago. Crystal Palace didn't have a kick all game. Brighton must have had numerous clear-cut chances. They just don't take the chances, and Crystal Palace go at the other end, and it happens majority of weeks for Brighton. They need to get that ball in the back of the net, and I feel like what is that Graham Potter can do, because he sets his side up a way where they're creating a lot of chances, they're playing good football, they just can't get that ball in the net, and then they can see the goal on the other end. So if they can start scoring a few more goals and get that first goal and second goal, then they should comfortably stay up. Footballing wise, are a much better side than the other sides around them. But do I think it'll change? Probably not, because if it's not changed yet, then why would it? I know they got a good win at the weekend, and I do think they'll stay up just because they're good enough to stay up, and they can get that odd win here and there. Like they beat Southampton, and it's a big win that was. They've got Newcastle on the weekend, and if they beat them, it's a 6-point game there, 3-point swing each way. So it's a game if they go and win, they're getting some more breathing space. But I do fear for them. You're looking at the fixtures coming up. They've got Manchester United away, they've got Everton to play, and Chelsea away. They are tough games, but actually thinking about it, they went to Anfield and won. Sometimes these games, they suit them a little bit more. But it will be tough. They will be down there, but I think they'll be okay come there.
Yeah, I think with Graham Potter, he's a manager that, speaking on my behalf, I think someone that I have a lot of admiration for. I think that the football he's tries to implement, the style of football he's created at Brighton, and the players that he's brought in and built the team around, I think they have a foundation to be a really good football inside, which they've shown they can be. But it's just you can't seem to string wins together, which leads me on to the next question, Sam. Do you believe that Brighton, obviously, if they stay up the season, do you think moving forward they can start to move up the league? Do you think that he's the right man, Potter, to take Brighton and sort of establish himself maybe more than how can I word it? So more than the team that they are now. So not battling relegation. Do you think they've got Graham Potter? Do you think he can realistically take Brighton up the table, or do you think that he's going to just face a big struggle with the misfortune that they've encountered on the pitch for the last season and beyond? Really, it's the last couple of seasons Brighton sort of struggled. What do you think? What do you believe Graham Potter's ceiling is as a manager with Brighton?
Personally, I think Graham Potter is a fantastic manager. Like Mo mentioned, he sets his teams up really well. They're very well organised, and I think the one thing they are lacking is literally that striker to put the ball in the back of the net. Well, the way I like to think of it is, would you rather be a team at the bottom hardly creating any chances at all, or a team at the bottom who are creating a lot of chances and missing them? Naturally, it's more of a worry if you're not creating enough chances than missing them week in, week out. I was quite surprised, to be honest, with how Brighton have fared this season. I thought the type of player they brought in, they'd sort of signed players quite astutely in the summer window. They brought in that Veltman from Ajax, who's left centre back, very comfortable on the ball. And they brought in Adam Lallana, who I thought was quite an underrated signing. I thought if he could stay injury-free, he'd be a very good signing. Obviously got lads like Basuma, Trossard, who are dangerous players on the day. And, the type of players capable of creating and scoring them chances to move a team up. And I definitely think they've got a chance. I think they're just that top striker away, really, from being a team that can, sort of be mid-table, similar to a Leeds United, for example. I've got a few stats here I'll just mention in Brighton. They've got an expected points of 47, but they're actually only sat on 29. That just shows you what it really, they're not scoring the chances that perhaps they're creating. Their expected goal isn't high enough, and they're conceding too many goals on what they deserve. So I feel if they can start tucking the chances away and potentially tighten up at the back like we've seen they are capable of doing, keeping a clean sheet away at Anfield, they've definitely got the tools. It's a developing football club. They've not been in the Premier League for that long. I think this is their 4th season in it, if I'm correct. Graham Potter's definitely the man to move that club forward. If they keep playing the right football, keep creating the chances, add to the squad each summer by bringing in the calibre of player that can turn these chances in, I think they'll very slowly, I think they will climb the table year on year.
You've mentioned there about they're just maybe a top striker away from taking those chances, and like you mentioned with the expected points that they should have had, they could establish himself as a sort of a top 10 Premier League side. If you could recruit one striker for Brighton, is there anybody in mind that you would, try and bring in if you was a Brighton manager, or someone on the recruitment side? Who would you bring in at Brighton to change their fortunes in front of goal? Is there anyone in mind, Sam?
Oh, you've put me on the spot there a bit. I'm thinking about players who are available. You're looking at perhaps players who have performed in big games and are really looking for that chance to put a run together and, put a run together in a sort of lower established Premier League team and prove themselves. And the one that came to mind for me was Divock Origi. I feel the way Brighton play with a lone striker, you need a striker who is going to be quite mobile. He's going to know where the back of the net is. We've seen Origi score some big goals for Liverpool. But unfortunately, he's just not getting the minutes he wants at the minute. And whether Brighton could afford to bring him in and give him the type of wages he wants, I feel like it would be a long shot. But I'd definitely be looking for that calibre of player, one who's proved he can play up front on his own, has got goals in him, and end of the day, he's performed in some big environments, which is what Brighton need, especially if they are battling at the bottom like they are at the moment.
Yeah, it's an interesting choice, obviously, as you mentioned, put you on a spot a bit there. And with Divock Origi, it's quite an interesting choice, but I guess having more regular minutes could work out, like pay dividends for both parties. Origi having more minutes might be the man to improve their fortunes in front of goal. Mo, do you have anyone in mind that you'd bring in if you was a Brighton manager who could change their fortunes in front of goal? Would you go with someone like Origi? Have you got a different player in mind?
Again, on the spot, Ivan Toney. Ivan Toney is clinical. In the Championship, he's been superb. I know it's a big step up, and he's moved from Peterborough to Brentford, and people were saying 10 million. It's a lot of money, but Ivan Toney, he just seems to be scoring every week. You watch Brentford and you'll check who scored, and Ivan Toney scored. So I think playing for Brentford, he'll get lots of chances, and I'm sure Brighton will be a lot higher up at the table if they had Toney.
Yeah, I mean, like you've mentioned, coming from Brentford, we saw someone do it this season. Watkins going to Villa, and obviously he doesn't score every week, but he scored a fair amount of goals, including a hat-trick against Liverpool early on in the season. So, it could be a great sort of addition for Brighton if you looked into that market. So, to round off this Premier League section of the podcast, I thought we could discuss Chelsea. Obviously, a team that has seen a change in fortunes, really. They've not established themselves, but they've reached the top 4, 3 points clear of West Ham. West Ham have a game in hand. But do you think, Mo, that the sacking of Lampard, firstly, there's quite a few questions really you could ask. Do you think the sacking of Lampard was the right decision? And I mean, I know now we've seen Tuchel come in and they've gone on, I think, a 12-game unbeaten run. So it's easy to say, it's the right decision. But do you think that Chelsea made the right call there with getting rid of Lampard?
At this time, no. Right now, yeah. At this time, I thought it was harsh. I did think it was harsh. Lampard, he was doing a decent job. He came in when Chelsea was on a transfer ban. He got them Champions League, which I thought was a good achievement. And then he's had a summer where the board have backed him. He's brought in numerous different players such as Chilwell, Werner, Havertz, Hakim Ziyech, and these players cost a lot of money. And at Chelsea, I wasn't surprised that the decision came, but I was a little disappointed. An English manager I'd like to have seen in given time. But now Tuchel's come in. He's been getting results. He's been winning football matches that Chelsea should be winning. They've got a lead from Atletico Madrid coming back to Stamford Bridge. And if they win that, there's no reason why they can't go far in Europe. I do think they'll get Champions League now. Tuchel's come in. Before he came in, I wasn't sure if they would. They just seem a revitalised side, and what I like about Tuchel is he's still finding out what his best team is, and he keeps rotating and depending on the game, and it seems to be working, and it keeps the team kind of fresh, playing in all competitions such as the FA Cup, the Premier League and the Champions League. So I do think it was a right decision, and I've been impressed with Tuchel's Chelsea so far.
Yeah, so moving to you, Sam, have you been impressed by, Tuchel's arrival and, they've changed the style of play, they've become a bit more conservative, more of a possession-based side, so a team that doesn't concede barely any goals. Are you impressed with his arrival and, how he's gone about his business? Do you think, again, I've asked Mo the same question, but do you believe that it was the right call to sack Lampard?
At the time, I was sceptical. I mean, obviously, when you're sacking a club legend, it's always a tricky one. And had he not been the club legend or like Frank Lampard, like we know him, potentially he could have gone a bit earlier. But at the end of the day, like since he's in Tuchel, and it did prove to be the right decision. He's come in straight away, put his own style on the team, lining up with his formation, only conceding 2 goals in his first 12 games is an outstanding return. And when you've got the type of players that Chelsea have brought in, you can't have Timo Werner, Mason Mount, Hudson-Odoi, players like that, you always give yourself a chance of scoring goals. So as long as they can keep keeping the ball out the back of the net, I reckon they can beat some quite high-profile teams and keep climbing the table like they have done.
Yeah, so you both mentioned how you've been, you think it's the right decision now looking back at it. Since he's arrived, he's obviously got the results for Chelsea, which is the one thing you're judged on mainly as a manager. Do you think going forward that he is the right man? There's a lot of talk about how good Man City are in the Premier League and how dominant they are. Do you think that Tuchel can take Chelsea and challenge a side like Manchester City? Because ultimately, that is what he's going to be judged on. Do you think, beginning with you, Sam, and then I'll ask Mo the same question, do you think that he's the right man in charge to not just improve them now in the short term? Do you think he can then take them up the next step of the ladder? Do you think he can turn them into title challengers next season?
Do I think he can turn them into title challenges? Yes, I do. Do I think it'll be next season? No, I don't. Personally, I think this Manchester City team is the best team to ever grace the Premier League. Hitting Centurions a couple of seasons ago, going on this 21-game winning run in a time where the fixtures were really coming thick and fast with the COVID break. I do feel like Manchester City and eventually Liverpool, if they hit the form again, will take quite some catching. But I do feel if Tuchel's given the tools, he's backed in the transfer market, he's given time, I do think eventually, give it 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 years, he can definitely build a team. If he brings the best out of the players he's got to challenge, I think any Chelsea fans having expectations that next season you're going to be challenging for the top, I think you need to just wind it in a bit and just realise that it's going to be a rebuilding process.
Yeah, a very sort of interesting viewpoint, perhaps a bit oversighted by myself. It's not going to be an overnight job where suddenly they turn into things. You want to see managers be given time, maybe like a 4 or 5 year project. Obviously, we've seen that with Klopp at Liverpool, transformed completely. Mo, do you think he is the right man then? In the next 3 to 4 years, that he can maybe bring a title back to Stamford Bridge? Do you think that it's the right appointment for the long-term future of Chelsea?
Potentially, it's not as easy as that because you have to look at how other sides will recruit in the summer. Like, will Manchester City bring in a striker because Aguero's past it, and if Haaland comes in, I can't see anyone beating Man City. Same with Liverpool. Will they bring a centre half in? Van Dijk will come back, and will it be the same Liverpool? But focusing just on Chelsea, they'll need to build some momentum to win this season, if that's potentially getting Champions League and winning the FA Cup, for example, and potentially getting to a semi-final of the Champions League, and just build some confidence into the next season, and then maybe next season challenge for the Premier League, and then the season after potentially win the Premier League. So for me, they've got to get the most out of some of their players, such as Timo Werner. We all know there's a player there in Werner, but it just seems to not be ticking at the moment. If they can get him scoring week in, week out, defensively Chelsea have been okay, and they've got players like Mason Mount. He's only going to get better. They've got young players, Chilwell and James at fullback. They're all going to improve. So yeah, I'd like to say Chelsea have got a fairly young team. They can improve. If they get a couple of more additions coming in, they could be title contenders. But again, it depends on the teams around them, and it will be a tough ask because everyone's aim is going to be the same, to be contenders such as Liverpool, Man City, Manchester United as well.
Yes, well, I think that concludes everything Premier League related as well. So thank you to you both for joining me today to discuss firstly the Championship and the Premier League. It's been great sort of discussing all the talking points from both divisions. So yeah, thank you for your time, lads.
Been a pleasure, mate. Thank you for having me.
No problem.